I was born in December 27th, 1926 in Okmulgee, Oklahoma.
And what did your parents do for a living?
My father worked for Chicago Bridge and Iron, and my mother was a housekeeper.
Where did you live during the period of 1941 through 1945?
In Champion, Ohio.
What made you move to this place?
My parents moved with their job, and I moved with them.
What was the extent of the education to this point?
I was a freshman in 1941 and graduated in 1944.
From?
Champion High School.
What was your occupation at this time?
At 16 years old, I started working at Copper Weld Steel, which I worked on Saturdays and Sundays. In the summer, I worked 5 days a week.
And what is your fondest memory before the war? Can you recall a particular instance that jumps out at you? The
neighborhood that I lived in, nobody had very much. We all enjoyed sports and hanging around together. And I can remember when Joe Louis used to fight, my father would get a big can of popcorn, and we'd all sit out in the backyard and eat popcorn and drink pop and listen to the fights.
What do you recall most from school?
School was still the same as ever. A lot of the graduating class were enlisting and going into the service, and when you got 18 years old, you had to sign up for the draft. You lose a lot of friends going to the service, and some of my classmates were a little bit older than I was, so when we got to my senior year, they were enlisting and leaving school before they even graduated.
Okay. Were you part of any extracurricular activities, and if so, what were they when you were in school?
Oh, I did all the sports in school, and I was in the plays in school. I was in the glee club in school. I was one of your people who just got involved in everything. I enjoyed going to school.
How did you get to school?
We traveled by school bus. I lived 3 miles from school. They picked us up in the morning and brought us home at night.
What were the other students like? Were there cliques back then like there are today?
Yes. They had, individuals had clubs like the pep club or the glee club or the 8-ball club, and they had different names for different clubs, and they had their buddies, and it was a chosen group that they let in these clubs, and nothing outstanding, that they were a bad bunch of people. It's just that they like to hang together, so they formed clubs.
Do you remember any specific teachers or classes that you can call from back then?
The one teacher I thought the world of was our superintendent, Mr. Carl C. Kaiser. He was a very studious man, taught math, and was A number 1. He ruled and governed the school. And I think was, in all my years and up to this day, I think he was the greatest man that ever sat behind a desk at a high school.
What types of clothes did you wear back then? Can you describe how the fashion scenes were like back in the early 1940s?
Oh, generally people were just slacks, shirt to school. Of course, at this time there was the zoot suit area where they wore baggy pants and long chains and big hats and long coats, and I never believed in stuff like that, but there was kids in school that did that. We also, when I was a sophomore in school, the girls one day all came to school dressed in slacks, which was unheard of at that time. And the same day that it happened, a group of boys from the same class came dressed in dresses. So it was kind of a humorous day at school.
Did the type of clothes that they wear at school similar to what they wore out of school, or is it like two different?
Yes.
Okay. What did you think your options were when you graduated high school?
When 18 years old, you knew you had to sign up for the service. So I enlisted in the United States Navy Air Corps.
What year was that?
1945.
Okay, what were your feelings about the war as a student, though? prior to your enlistment?
Well, you knew it was a bad thing, but a lot of people you never give much thought at that time. You knew a lot of your friends were having to go, and people that was in your school at that time, they had to go and were going heavy, and some of them were losing their lives. But until it strikes home, I guess you don't really give it a second thought.
Could you touch on your emotions though? Were you like scared or intimidated, anxious? Or
well, I had some emotions about it. I was kind of a home person. I didn't really want to go, but I knew it was my job. As an individual, everybody that was able to go had to go. So that's just one of the things in life that you had to do.
Where were you working during this particular time period after you graduated high school?
I worked, I graduated when I was 17. I worked at Copperwell Steel until December. And then in January of 1945, I left for the service.
What was the job like while working at Copperwell?
I worked in a rolling mill, and they used to cut roll bars down to certain sizes and cut them off at certain lengths. And I worked in what they call the hotbed, which threw chains around them and hooked them up to a crane hook, and they hauled them away from the hotbed, and then we waited till the next cradle was loaded and did the same thing over again.
Do you remember the pay or recall whatsoever?
I think we got tonnage at that time, and I think for a 40-hour week, I used to make about $45.
Do you recall any other employees that you worked with at the time?
At that time, I was 16 years old, and most of the people that worked in there was in their 40s and 50 years old, and I never got real close to any of them.
You just worked the job?
It was a job.
How did you get the job?
My father, he worked at Copperwell Steel then at that time, and he got me in the plant, and I worked Saturdays and Sundays as I was going to school, and then during the summer I worked my 40-hour week like everybody else, and this was between my sophomore and junior year, and I did the same thing between my senior year.
Why did you want to work at that particular place though?
Close to home. Needless to say, as I said, I played a lot of sports in school, and I could have had a job any place in town because of my basketball. But I chose Copperwell because, like I said, we could get up, and it was only 2 miles to work.
Do you think there were a lot of options in terms of the job back at that particular time?
I don't think so. It was steel. You were rolling steel, and you were rolling for different kind of businesses. It was into the war at that time, and I knew that it was only a matter of months before I'd have to go to the service, so there was really no choice, for me outside of just working until it was time to go and then go.
Could you describe a typical day while at work, though, from start to finish, generically? Could you just describe how the day went along?
Well, we'd go to work, and work starts 7 o'clock in the morning, and you start rolling steel, and it'd usually take about half hour, 45 minutes before steel started hitting the labels. And after you did that, then you just started wrapping the steel and hooking it onto a crane and haul it away, and that's what you did for 8 hours.
And what time did you get off?
We got off at 3:30 in the afternoon. 7 to 3:30 is was our shift. And because I was the youngest guy in there, they used to send me to the cafeteria all the time to pick up their coffee and sandwiches at noon. I got to be the runner boy. But and they all called me Junior.
What did your nights consist of? Did you do anything?
Wasn't much. Just come home because at that time most of the kids that I knew were either gone to the service or were going to the service, and There really wasn't much to do at that time.
When did you leave this job and why?
I left this job to go to the service.
What were your feelings about the war as a worker, though?
Same as I did before I was a worker. I didn't like it. There was nothing, I had no control over it, nothing I could do about it. But when I went to work, I did my day's work, and we got paid for it.
So you just worked the job and trying to think about it?
That's right. You don't, because I knew sooner or later that I was going. And it was a way of life at that time.
What year did you enter the service?
1945, January 1945.
And what branch was that?
United States Naval Air Corps.
Stationed out of where?
I was stationed in Memphis, Tennessee, NATTC, Naval Air Technical Training Center.
What did you think were the reasons for your enlistment or getting drafted, but in your case, enlisting?
Because I wanted to pick my branch of the service. I didn't want to go to the Army because I didn't like to walk.
What did your significant others think about you going into the service?
Well, my mother didn't like it. My dad knew it was a way of life. That was about the extent of it.
You knew that you just had to go, right?
You knew you had to go. So you might as well go where you wanted to go.
Mm. Did you know anyone else where you enlisted? Did you guys go in together? Anyone else?
There was a boy by the name of Eric Seymour. Him and I signed up together and we went to Memphis at the same time.
What basic skills did you learn while in basic training?
Well, I learned to be a radioman, a signalman, went to radar school, went to gunnery school, flew in airplanes, and that was a basic thing that you learned because I was in there to be a radioman. You learned the Morse code, and you had to check out at 16 words a minute in 16 weeks. And it was very simple for me. I checked out in 8 weeks. I loved it.
So the transition from here to there wasn't very hard for
No.
you at all? You know?
It's the only thing that's difficult is I was a very picky eater at home. And when you went in there, you couldn't be a picky eater. You ate what they served you or you didn't eat it all. And after a few weeks, you find out that eating becomes a habit. And you learn to like what they cook. And it turned out to be pretty good.
What do you think they were training you for?
War.
And what were your feelings about the war as a soldier once enlisted?
I didn't like it because we were losing a lot of American lives, but it was a way of life that something had to be done. Hitler had to be stopped and was stopped. Japan was sneaky in what they did to us. They had to be repaid. Were they paid enough? I don't think so. But that's basically, everybody has their own opinion about it. I didn't like it, but nobody liked it. But just something that had to be done.
Can you recall where you were on December 7th, 1941, the day Pearl Harbor came under attack?
I went to church in the morning. I came home from church. People in the neighborhood were scuttling around and talking, and we found out what was going on. Of course, at that time, we didn't have TV. All we had was radio, so everybody turned the radio on. And we listened to the news of what had happened, and of course, everybody started getting into a talk and why. And
was everybody in a state of disbelief then, you think? Or
everybody was in a state of shock. They knew that we had a couple of representatives over here from Japan that was talking down in Washington, and it seemed like they were stalling the United States, and the United States was going along with them, and all of a sudden They dropped the boom on us. I really couldn't understand how all this could come about with the technology that we were supposed to have, that so many people were caught asleep and so many people were killed. You would think that we'd have knew something about what was going on. We were supposed to have a spying system or something in the United States. We were supposed to have radar, nothing. People didn't even know how to use it. And I think people were just living a big, fat, happy life, and they were shocked.
When and how did you hear about the attack?
On the radio. Once we heard from the neighborhoods, people were talking. Everybody turned the radio on and sat down, and next 3 or 4 hours, everybody was just sitting around the radio listening to what had happened, and it was just utter disbelief.
Just word obviously spread like wildfire then, huh?
Yes, everybody was shocked. We knew he was in war with Germany. We never had any idea it would be in, that Japan would pull something like this on us, but they did.
What was your understanding about the war previous to this day?
I really didn't give it much thought. I knew we were fighting Germany. I didn't have any idea that... I knew Japan was negotiating something with us, but I didn't know what it was, and I just couldn't imagine that people could do such a thing. And how we could get caught so sound asleep and so many American lives were lost because we weren't ready. I think as much as it shocked us to hear it on the radio, it shocked those people who was over there that got killed because they didn't even know what was going on either. And they're the ones that should have known.
So the people definitely got the rug swept out from underneath them. Yeah.
We got knocked on our cans.
What were your feelings towards Germany about this time of the war?
Well, I thought Hitler was an idiot that tried to conquer the world, and he just bit off a heck of a lot more than he could chew at one time. And as far as having things that were good in war, jets and stuff like that, they were well advanced as far as we were concerned at the time. But I just think that going in and spreading his troops as thin as he did in so many different places and attacking everybody was just utterly stupidity. And then when the United States got into it, it was just too much with us coming from one side, Russia coming from the other. He didn't have a prayer.
Same question, but about Japan.
That, to this day, I still can't figure out. I can't understand why a little country like that, so far away from us, not even close to us, think that they could take us on and beat us. It's beyond my imagination. They tried it. Didn't succeed.
What about Italy?
Italy, I think El Duce was just a follower. He was just like Hitler. He was power crazy, and he figured that Hitler sold him a line of goods about how big he would be in the world, along with Hitler and stuff like that. And so he just committed himself to Hitler, and they took everybody on, but they didn't have a prayer. Too many nations had bound together to fight against just the two countries, and it was a long war. Lost a lot of nice people, all because of stupidity, greed, power.
What was your initial response or feelings towards the news of the Pearl Harbor attack?
Shock, dismay, how something like this could happen to our country with all the technology we should have had, spies that we should have had, communications that we should have had, radar that we did have. People were just asleep. I think everybody was living a good life and just didn't think anything like this could happen. But it did.
How did the next several days increase or decrease those feelings?
Well, at the time I was a freshman in high school and probably didn't give it much thought, except that I knew that we were going to war and that there was going to be a big change as far as the country was concerned, and what had to be done was going to be done. And it was done.
This is a generalized question, but what did you do during the war years? Could you give us a general timeline of what you were doing and where you were at between 1941 through 45?
1941, I was a freshman in high school. 1942, I was a sophomore. 1943, I was a junior. 1944, I was a senior. I went to school. When I was 16 years old, I went to work at Copper Weld Steel. I worked on Saturdays and Sundays and worked all summer long. And that was my life up until I graduated from school in 1944. In December of that year, I knew that I was going to turn 18 years old. Instead of going into the Army, I went to Detroit, Michigan and took a 4-hour test. And I passed to go into the Navy Air Corps. In January, I was called into the service.
Could you describe what a typical day was like back when you served in the military?
Oh, you get up in the morning at 6 o'clock, shower, get dressed, you meet out front in formation, and I was a wing leader at the time, and I had 2 section leaders, and 2 sections were under the section leaders. And what happened was that I had to take a roll call to make sure that everybody was there. And then we would go to chow. After chow, we meet back at the barracks. Then we get in formation and we go to classes. And we march to class. And we went from classes till noon. Took a break for lunch. And in the afternoon at 1 o'clock, we started back to classes till 4 o'clock. And from 4 o'clock on was free time. I was chosen a wing leader, and I had 2 section leaders and 2 sections under me, which amounted to about 40 people. I had 1 duty night out of 4, 1 duty weekend out of 4. The other 3, I got liberty. I could go into town if I wanted to. My section leaders, they each got 2 out of the 4, and the sections themselves got 1 out of 4. On my duty nights, I would sit in the barracks and was on the loudspeaker, and any phone calls that would come in, I would take and call the guys to the phone. And at 10 o'clock when the lights went out at night, I had to go around and pull bed check. Had to get the guys up for their duty nights at 12 and 4 o'clock in the morning. 6 o'clock was reveille. Everybody had to get up again. We started a new day, and then I would turn the barracks over to the duty officer for the next day. And that was a typical day in the service.
Did you make a lot of friends with the guys in the service? Do you still keep in contact with any of them whatsoever?
No. I've been out of the service now I got out of the service in 1946. So I've been out for 61 years. And I wouldn't know where one of them was at.
Now, as far as a non-combatant is concerned, how did you feel about the war?
I didn't like it. I don't like to see people getting killed for no reason whatsoever, for stupidity. But it was forced upon us, and that was something that we had to take care of. We had to protect ourselves. War, no good at all.
What specific sacrifices did you make for the war? Or at least people that you knew of personally that made for the war?
The only thing we had was like rations, and there were certain things that you couldn't get anymore, and traveling was cut down. Gasoline was hard to come by. Silk stockings were hard to come by. There was a lot of things that was hard to get that you learned to live without. But it was a way of life. It wasn't just you, it was everybody.
So you basically had what you needed just to get by. There's no wants anymore.
You had a good life. It wasn't that like you see a lot of these countries over there where the families are starving and kids are starving. It wasn't that way. There was work to be had, and people were working and making money, and it was just that a few things that there wasn't a lot of and you couldn't get.
How was the economy back then? You remember it?
The economy was booming because everybody was going into making things for the war. There was plenty of work. Steel was big. Manufacturing was tanks and airplanes and stuff like that, so there was plenty of work for everybody.
Do you remember any drives to collect either scrap or tin or rubber?
Oh yes, they had drives all the time that scrap yards were buying everything that they could get, and weren't paying a big amount for them, but they were, Then you had junk dealers that come around and they'd buy it right out of your backyard. Yes, they had a lot of scrap drives at that time.
Did you partake in any of them? Or?
No. Like I said, I was just a freshman in high school and kind of living your own life, I guess.
How did people in your community adapt or not adapt to the demands of the war?
You had no choice. You were dealt a hand, and everybody lived by that. They had to. If it wasn't there, you couldn't have it. If you were fortunate enough to have the money or the coupons to have a little bit more than somebody else, you got it. Outside of that, everybody was, in my neighborhood, everybody was about the same.
No better, no worse. Huh?
No better, no worse.
Was there any sense of jealousy or envy or anything?
No.
Ever since then?
No. Nobody had anything. Back at that time, half of us in the neighborhood had one old beat-up car, and we used to go swimming in the Mahoning River, which didn't cost the kids nothing. And we used to go over to the orchard and get apples, and we played games out in our fields and stuff like that. It was just a neighborhood thing.
Speaking of that, what types of things did you do for fun?
We played basketball, we played baseball during the summer. In the wintertime, we used to go down on the creek and we played hockey down on the creek. And when the ice started to break, we'd get on the icebergs and float on the icebergs and fall in the creek and go home soaking wet and do the same thing the next day because nobody had much. And we just enjoyed ourselves, that's all.
Did you ever notice a lot of families, different families bonding together and doing stuff together, or was it?
Oh, the whole neighborhood was that way. Our neighborhood was a great neighborhood. Everybody had kids, and we were all roughly about the same age, and we all played together. And like I said once before, they used to have fights, and when they did, my father would make a big pot of popcorn, take the radio outside. Neighborhood kids come over and we all sit in the backyard and listen to the fight and eat popcorn and Then play games after. Nobody had any money, so just a simple way of life.
What about the adults or parents? Did you sense them interacting a lot about discussing the war a lot more than the kids?
No, never paid much attention to it. Dad worked, Mom worked. Most of the men and women in the neighborhood, they all had jobs and they all worked.
Did a lot of the women work before the war started, or did they just as a result?
Most of them, as a result of the war, started to work.
What type of jobs did they typically do?
Different kinds. Some did house cleaning, some worked in restaurants, some worked in the mills.
What about pay? Did you sense that they were equal, or were they obviously discriminated against?
No,
in terms of their pay?
it wasn't. Discrimination wasn't brought up too much back then because everybody was trying to do their job, and there was plenty of jobs for if you wanted to work, you could work. It all depends just what you wanted to do, and you were paid accordingly.
What consumer items were not available and why?
Gasoline was a ration book. Tires were hard to come by. Like I said, silk stockings. Women couldn't get silk stockings.
Why the silk stockings? What was that used for?
Parachutes, I guess. All I know is that silk stockings were hard to come by. And there was few items that were hard to, get by because a lot of them was going to the surface,
Is it food or is it more like...
Food, yeah.
Could you give us an example, like some of the foods, like sugar, or is it like...
Sugar was hard to come by, yeah.
A lot of ingredients type of stuff, huh?
Well, it's been a long time and it's kind of hard to remember things back then. There's been so many changes since then, And I was just a young kid, 15, 16 years old, when this all started. And at that age, you don't pay much attention to, what's ration or what's not ration because, as I said before, we never had very much anyhow, so anything that we got was standard.
What did you spend your money on?
Well, I can remember that on Saturday I used to go to town and I would go to this one restaurant and I got a hot roast beef sandwich with mashed potatoes and gravy for 25 cents a piece. I used to have 2 of them every Saturday and go to a show and I wouldn't even spend $1. Hitchhike to town and hitchhike home. And that was my enjoyment for the week.
Do you remember the ration coupon books? How did they work? Could you briefly describe them, if you can recall?
I don't recall how it was. I know they had ration books that you were allowed so much, and I can't remember where it was, the type of job you had or what it was, but I don't remember exactly, how it was set up.
Were you married or dating at this particular time?
I was dating my wife at the time. She was 14, I was 16. And didn't have a car. So anytime we went someplace, we'd get on the bus and go to town. We'd go to a show and then we'd get back on the bus and come home at night. That was the extent of our getting around. Any other time, we'd walk where we wanted to go.
What other places would you guys visit besides going to a show? You guys do anything else?
Oh, no, we'd go roller skating. We participated in a lot of school activities. And I played at all the sports in school. She was a cheerleader, and we was in the choir together, and we were in plays. And it was a good life.
And what year were you two married?
1947.
Just a couple years after the
She was 14 when I started going with her. I was 16, and when I got married, I was, let's see, I think I was 19 and she was 18.
Do you remember the type of the music you listened to?
Oh, yes. It was Harry James and Glenn Miller and Tommy and Jimmy Dorsey and Gene Krupa and the Mills Brothers. And music at that time was fantastic. It made sense. Big bands used to come here to Idora Park, a few of them, and they played down there for dances and stuff like that. Of course, that was before I was old enough to go dance with them. But a couple of them come down and played at the Robin Theater here in Warren, Ohio. And when I was a senior in school, my class went to New York City for 1 week, and I was blessed with the opportunity to go atop the Waldorf Astoria, and I seen Harry James and his orchestra. I went to Paramount Theater and seen Charlie Spivak and his orchestra. At that time, they were big.
How about movies? Any movies that stuck out to you?
Movies at that time were movies, not like they are now. At that time, musicals were big. Betty Grable, June Haver, June Allison, Dick Haymes. They were in all the musicals. Gene Kelly, Fred Astaire. And then, right after the war, they started making all kind of war movies. Guadalcanal and Dunkirk, and so even though we were fighting war, people were going to go watch wars in the theaters.
Was you a fan of that or not?
Pardon?
Was you a fan of that or not? Going to go see those movies?
I went to see them, but I loved the musicals and the Western. There was a lot of Western pictures that I went and seen too that had the old time stars on them, and eventually it went into Robert Taylor and Richard Widmark, and then they all started making Westerns later on. But musicals in my time were the thing. They don't make them like that today.
How about the radio?
That's all we had. You listen to the radio all the time. Amos and Andy, The Shadow, listen to music, the news. Everything we had at that time was radio. That was our enjoyment, sitting at home, listening to the fights.
So was it definitely a family bonding experience, just sitting around the radio listening to it?
That's it. It's like, radio then was like television is today.
Do you remember where you were when you first heard the war had ended?
I think I was in Purcell, Oklahoma, in gunnery school. When the war ended.
How did you feel?
Elated. I was no hero. I wasn't one of these person, and there was a lot of people that was killed in the war and stuff like that, and it scared me. I was just a young kid, and there was a lot of young kids that lost their lives doing the job that they wanted to do, and they feel they had to do. And I guess I was just one of the fortunate ones that I was born at the time that It was at the tail end of everything. I didn't have to go into combat.
Was there mass chaos in terms of the community? I mean, not chaos, but was it mass celebration or mass jubilation?
Oh, my God. You would never believe it. Especially in New York City. New York City was a mess. They were tearing everything up. Where we was at down in Oklahoma, it was just a few people, around, there might have been 500 or 600. And we were all happy. A lot of people called home, talked to their parents, talked to their loved ones. Yes, I was glad it was over. Because we lost a lot of good kids. To this day, I don't know why.
What was your hope for your life after the war? What was your plans now that you knew that you wouldn't have to?
Just to go on with my life, do the things that I wanted to do. I come home to service. I got married, went to work. I played 1 year of professional baseball. Come home and went to work at Packard. And at Packard I worked 40 years. Treated me very well. My wife worked at Packard for 28 years. I have a son that's been there for 39 years that's retiring now. So General Motors has been very good in my family.
What was your hobbies after the war? What did you like?
Baseball, basketball, golf, bowling, anything with sports. Fishing, I did it all. Loved it. That was my life.
Do you think the war changed the country?
It's hard to say. I don't know. I really don't know. Because to this day, we're still in wars.
Do you think we learned anything
No,
from that war?
I don't think we learned anything. Because we're still getting into them. We're still fighting wars. And to me, it's a war that we can't win. These people over there that we're fighting today have been fighting for years. Life to them means nothing. They blow themselves up to kill 3 of us. Are we going to learn anything? No. Because it seems like any time that there's a war, we have to be into it. And we lose a lot of good people. For what reason?
The U.S. definitely acts as the road's police, huh?
That's right. And I think if we took all the money that we are spending for this Iraq war and put it to the use in the United States, that we wouldn't have people starving. We wouldn't have people that need medical care that couldn't get medical care. I just think that we waste a lot of money on people who really don't care. They don't like us. How many dignitaries have you heard that goes over and they drive by in a car and they throw tomatoes and everything and signs up, go home and stuff like that? It happens all over the world. And yet every time there's a war, we're in it.
Do you think World War II changed you?
No. I really don't think so. I've been a kind of person that I try to live my own life. I raised my family. And we had a pretty good life.
Since many people who were not around during the war might read or see parts of this interview, what would you like people to remember about the war?
Remember the people we lost. And remember there's better ways to do things. That as smart as we're supposed to be, we should have been better prepared and ready for what happened to us. We never should have lost as many people at Pearl Harbor as we lost. No way. Those people never had a chance. Never had a chance.
What would you like people to remember about you?
Never really give it much thought. A caring person. Person that would help if you needed help. Always there if you needed me. Good family man. That's about it.